Alright, look, I'm not even going to try to tiptoe around things this time. Complete and utter disregard for spoilers for Xenoblade 1, 2, Torna, and Future Connected are going to be in this video, so watch at your own risk if you haven't finished them. I'm going to need to make a lot of comparisons to Xenogears because of the nature of things that seem to be in this game. However, I'm going to describe things like that in certain terms so that if you've played Gears, you'll know what I'm talking about, but if you haven't, you won't have anything spoiled for you. While any rational person would start this analysis with the actual trailer itself, I'm instead going to read the message that Xenoblade series executive director Tetsuya Takahashi gave in full, and then comment on it before we start the trailer, because it's really going to set the tone for everything else in this video. Hi everyone, this is Tetsuya Takahashi from Monolith Soft. Just over 4 years since the release of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and 1.5 years since the release of Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, we now bring to you news regarding the latest game from Monolith Soft, Xenoblade Chronicles 3. As the name indicates, it's the third installment in the Xenoblade Chronicles series. We are currently making final adjustments to ensure we create the best game possible based on everything we've learned from the past entries in the series. The key visual features a broken great sword of Mechanus and the body of the Orion Titan with a gaping wound. I imagine everyone who saw the trailer was quite surprised by the final scene. What is this visual hinting at? I can't reveal that just yet. What I can tell you is that this visual was conceived quite some time ago. More precisely speaking, we came up with it sometime between the end of development of Xenoblade Chronicles and the beginning of development of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, so it's not something we recently added to the series. We believe this game will be enjoyable for both those who've played Xenoblade Chronicles or Xenoblade Chronicles 2, as well as those who will be playing a Xenoblade Chronicles game for the first time. The characters were designed by Masasuke Saito, who also designed the characters for Xenoblade Chronicles 2. While we can't reveal them at this time, Koichi Mukitani, side note, this is Choco, who you've probably heard of before, created some of the game's key artwork. As you can see, familiar staff members with the Xenoblade Chronicles series have once again come together to create this game. The game music was also handled by artists who've contributed to the series in the past. The music for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was composed by Yasunori Mitsuda, Manami Kiyota, Ace, which consists of Tomori Kudo and Chico, Kenji Hiramatsu, and Mariam Abu Nasser. The music in this game maintains the unique Xenoblade Chronicles touch while also taking on a new challenge, namely that of integrating a flute-based melody as its motif. The flute is actually one of the key themes in this game. A variety of other elements and themes are hidden in the trailer, and we'll be revealing the details a bit at a time going forward. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is a new adventure bringing together the worlds of Xenoblade Chronicles and Xenoblade Chronicles 2 to take players into the future. While there is still some time left before the release of the game, I hope you'll look forward to it. Thanks, Mr. Takahashi. So the first takeaway from this is that this game is not just them capitalizing on the popularity of 2 and connecting the new world they had in mind for 3 to 2 after they realized it was so popular. They thought of at least a vague idea of what this game would be prior to starting development on 2, so that means they went through the entire development cycle of 2, and probably more importantly, of Definitive Edition and Future Connected, knowing full well that this is where they wanted to go. That means that we can look through things that are both in 2 and in Future Connected, especially for hints as to what might happen in this game. The first thing I'm immediately going to say is one of the two nations that we see at war in this game is led by Melia and is going to be the evolution of the new Alchemoth High Entia Empire that she started at the end of Future Connected. Takahashi states that they think it's possible to enjoy 3 without having played any previous game in the series, and while you'll obviously get the most out of it from having played 1, 2, Torna, and Future Connected beforehand, as well as probably Xenogears, as you'll see, I'm not sure if it's actually going to end up being a good idea to go into 3 completely blind to what Xenoblade is as a series. I'm just saying, this is probably PR speak. We don't have to take everything they say here at face value. Remember, this is the same guy who insisted that Xenoblade 1 and 2 weren't connected before 2 came out, when lo and behold 2 was very connected to 1. As far as art is concerned, they've spoken before about wanting to create a unique style for the Xenoblade series, like how Final Fantasy has Tetsuya Nomura, and while I think most people, myself included, took that as being, we're going to find a new artist and use their style for whatever the series is going to be like going forwards, it turns out that they actually worked with a previous artist and just refined their style, as Masasuke Saito was also the lead character designer for Xenoblade 2. Yes, they basically said, okay, make your characters a bit more realistically proportioned, in terms of like height and facial structure and stuff, and tone down the horniness, because that's basically what it is. Compare the renders of characters from 3 to characters of 2, and you will see that, especially in the way he draws faces, it is definitely still the same guy, and that's the place where you can most obviously see connections. Choco, on the other hand, has not designed many characters for the Blade series, so I wouldn't be surprised if he literally just drew some concept art or some mechs, because he was also a mech designer for Xenosaga, as well as actual characters for like Saga 3 and stuff. He may also have been the one to take up the mantle of the more horny character designs. Who knows? We have not seen Pyra and Mithra in this trailer, and while Melia got a new outfit, it is largely based on her Future Connected outfit, and Nia's outfit is largely based on her Blade outfit from 2, so if Pyra and Mithra get new outfits, maybe they weren't designed by Saito, and maybe they wanted to not have the Choco designs in the first trailer because they wanted to entice people who were turned off of 2 by their designs. This is getting a little conspiratorial, but it's all a possibility. As for music, I will admit I was completely wrong. I expected Yasunori Mitsuda would not be doing any composing for Xenoblade 3, largely because he said he didn't want to do any more composing on the Xenoblade games in the past, and wanted to just kind of leave that job to the younger composers who helped create a unique style for that series. As for the other people, Ace and Kenji Hiramatsu, operating together under the name Ace Plus, and Manami Kiyota were basically the 2 highest contributing composers for Xenoblade 1, and while you might not be familiar with the name Mariam Abu Nasser, I do believe that they also worked with Mitsuda on his compositions for 2, so this is basically just the people who did 2 doing another game. As for the flute-based melody, we're gonna get into that a bit later, because literally the first shot of the trailer is the main character playing a flute, and the flute shows up not only in the trailer music, but also several other times throughout the trailer visuals. As for the trailer, the first thing I'm going to point out is that the game is still rating pending, at least in North America, despite the fact that it comes out in 7 months. Monolith has mentioned wanting to do a dark, heavy, M-rated game full of violence and sexual undertones, and this does not seem to be that. However, if it does go a bit darker than something like Xenoblade 2 does, and steers more closely to what the original Xenogears was going for, it may end up with the M anyway, because, let's face it, if you've played Gears, you know that Gears would not be rated T if it came out in the present day. This might also just be because it's still fairly far from release, so they haven't gotten around to sending a final version to the ESRB for rating, but it might also be that it's not going to be rated T like all the other previous games in the series. The trailer itself opens up with the character that we'll find out is going to be the male lead, playing the flute in a wasteland of sorts, while some motes of light float around him. This guy and the 5 other main characters, all of whom are brand new and have not shown up in 1 or 2 before, have actually gotten small bios on various Nintendo websites, and I am going to go over all 6 of those when we first see them. However, I'm going to delay on this guy, as a couple shots after this, we get establishing shots for the world, and I want to talk about that stuff first. We see a close-up of the male lead's face, and you can obviously tell that this is probably using a modified version of the engine they used for Xenoblade 2, but the presentation has been drastically increased in all regards. It looks better, higher polygon count, better textures, more animation, especially on things like the hands. It all looks way better than 2 and Definitive Edition, even combined, I'll say. There is a distinct possibility that this trailer was not running on base Switch hardware. I'm gonna put that out now. I wouldn't be surprised if this game runs really, really badly on the base Switch, and that it's already been delayed a bit to try and line up better with new hardware or something. This looks way too good to be running on the same Switch I've had since 2017. I'm saying it like it is. More importantly for the game itself though, if you look at the flute he's playing, it has a lot of gold filigree with green stuff on it, and those very heavily resemble symbols associated with Zanza from Xenoblade Chronicles 1. So this is already a hint that a lot of elements from the past of these worlds are going to still be relevant in some way or another, and the game doesn't just completely revolve around brand new stuff that hadn't been thought about beforehand. We then hear a voice that is almost certainly this character speaking, say, "Fighting in order to live, and living to fight. That is the way of our world, Ionios," as the scene fades to a battlefield. Before we talk about the battle scene itself and the general state of the world, I want to talk about the name of the world first, Ionios. This is a Greek word of biblical significance, and yeah, we're getting into the religious references in this Xeno game right away. This is a Greek word where we get things like aeon, eon, that kind of thing from. And yes, it does also have the same root word as the name of the giant robot that is Xenoblade 2's final boss. This word means something to the effect of perpetual, eternal, or everlasting, without beginning or without end, and shows up a lot in the Greek versions of both the Old and New Testament. Given the fact that this world seems to be locked in a perpetual state of pointless war, the name is very fitting, and I would not be surprised whatsoever if it has some sort of secondary significance we find out about later on. It's also worth noting that this whole idea of something being perpetual and everlasting is very similar to a certain verse in Revelations that people who played Xenogears might be familiar with. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Xeno is coming full circle with this game, and I can't wait to tell you more about how. As for the scene itself, this is very clearly a deliberate mirror to the beginning of the Battle of Sword Valley scene in the beginning of Xenoblade Chronicles 1. You see plenty of human soldiers with the exact same sort of helmet charging into battle in some sort of wasteland that likely is the exact same place that the main character was standing in before. The big difference here, though, is that they're equipped a lot better than with the much more primitive-looking melee weapons and guns that characters in the Battle of Sword Valley have. These are all energy weapon type things, and if you look closely on the outfits of these soldiers, even the generic ones have a very familiar looking glowing blue disc somewhere on their belt. This is the disc that Shulk wore in Future Connected and was tied to his Replica Monado in order to power it. As I predicted, Replica Monado technology has become mass-produced and widespread, so that basically the foot soldiers of the nation that has descended from the people of the worlds of Bionis and Mechonis are using it as their regular weapons in battle. And it will be very easy to tell, even if it's not a battle scene, that a certain character is from this nation if we see that same glowing disc on their clothing, because that means that they're part of this military or have a weapon developed by these people. The other big deal is how they're definitely not fighting the same foe that the Homs were fighting at the beginning of Xenoblade 1. Not only is the Replica Monado Machina technology, modified by Shulk of course, but at the end of this shot, before it cuts away, we see that they're definitely not fighting the Mechon, because the Mechon are on their side this time, as the camera pans up and shows what seems to be a Fortress-class Faced Mechon unit. Now, initially, Faced Mechon were designed to basically be powered by the Homs inside them. However, the Xenoblade 1 Monado secret file has explicitly confirmed that Linata was able to cure the face units and restore the Homs within. And also, I would not be surprised whatsoever if the Machina were able to design new Faced Mechon that worked exactly like a classic pilotable mech, and that this nation uses them in their army just as a type of mobile weapon. As a matter of fact, I know that for sure, because the next shot cuts back to the MC, and I want to properly explain him, so I need to first give context on what the world of Ionios is really like. I'm just going to straight up read off of the Nintendo UK description of the world of Xenoblade 3, and show some of the screenshots they posted there, most of which are in the trailer themselves. I'm just going to show some of them now to give better context. Bringing together the futures of Xenoblade Chronicles and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, this title will take players to the world of Ionios, home to two hostile nations. Kevesh, a nation where mechanical technology was developed. Their armies are composed of units consisting mainly of combat vehicles. They use units of small mobile weapons operated by soldiers riding them. And Agnes, a nation strong in ether, a magical technology. Their forces are built around units that specialize in ether combat, and they fight with small mobile autonomous weapons that use ether technology. 6 soldiers hailing from these nations will take part in a grand tale with life as its central theme. And then it goes on to the character descriptions. First off, we have 2 nations at war, one of which has a name that starts with a K, and the other has a name that starts with an A. That is literally the basic plot of Xenogears as described in the opening text crawl. Secondly, the names of both nations not only mean something in another language, but they actually mean the same thing in 2 different languages. Kavesh is Hebrew for lamb, and Agnes is Latin for lamb. So, we have 2 nations fighting each other, their names mean the exact same thing in different languages, and it's lamb. Agnes something is even used in the Latin version of the phrase Lamb of God, so there is very clearly another religious reference here. However, it might not be Lamb of God. It might be a more sinister thing like lamb for the slaughter of some sort, which is very possible given a certain voice line later on in the trailer, and certain other uses of the word lamb earlier on in the Xeno series. Keep your Xenogears and Xenosaga brains open, there's a lot of stuff here. Mostly Gears though. As for the nations themselves, it is extremely clear that each one is the descendant of the various peoples from the world of a previous Xeno game. Kevesh is the descendant of Xenoblade 1 people, and Agnes is the descendant of Xenoblade 2 people. We've already seen this. The shot mirroring the Battle of Sword Valley from the beginning of Xenoblade 1 is the army of Kevesh launching into a battlefield, presumably against Agnes. We can also tell that based on the description. Mechanical technology means stuff related to the Mechon and the Machina, and their armies consist of a bunch of foot soldiers wearing Shulk's Monado replica gear, and then combat vehicles that are mobile weapons operated by soldiers riding them. That could mean Face Mechon or the Colony 9 mobile artillery that crashed into a house, or that got a house crashed into it, you know what I'm saying, and probably both. So yeah, that first shot is clearly the military of Kevesh. We're also going to see later on that the leader of this nation is a returning and slightly older looking Melia Antiqua, probably staying in her role as Empress that she assumed at the end of Future Connected. Agnes, of course, then is the descendants of people from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and this is fairly obvious as they rely more on ether, which makes sense because, well, they lost most of their technology because a lot of their high technology had to do with using Titans as weapons, and it seems like most Titans died out at the end of Xenoblade 2, so they had to rely on things like ether and blades. We can also see, based on shots of their military, that their autonomous robot vehicles that don't have pilots are probably based on either the artifices or the sovereigns from the World Tree, which again makes sense. As far as we can tell, at least one artifice siren survived the end of the game, and they can probably still very easily salvage things from where the World Tree was, even though that collapsed. Also, if we look at the foot soldiers, they're carrying yellowy energy weapons that do not resemble replica Monados, and their armor is reminiscent of Adam, Torna, and the Indoline army, so they're clearly using technology based on that. We will also later find out that the leader of this nation is almost certainly Nia, who is still alive due to being a flesh eater. The next scene in the trailer involves what seems to be a small skirmish in the same battlefield, taking place in a burning field of orange grass and some small flowers, and this is going to introduce us to 4 of the 6 main characters that I mentioned before, starting with the main character who backflips into frame after seeming to dodge an attack, so we're just going to talk about them in order they show up here. This is Noah, the male lead of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. He's described as one of the protagonists and a soldier of Kevesh. Noah is also an Offseer who mourns for soldiers who've lost their lives on the battlefield. This is almost certainly the purpose of the flute. It's playing a certain tune that is supposed to pay respect to those who have died in what is presumably this endless war between 2 nations. Noah has black hair tied up in a ponytail, and he even uses a red hair tie, and I'm just saying, that makes me think Fei Fong Wong, because, well yeah, his hair is a lot more anime and ridiculous. The original name for Xenogears was Project Noah, and that has already given me multiple possibilities for where this game's story could go just based on that simple fact. First off, there is the fact that the main character is named Noah in a series that loves to reference Abrahamic religions, so there's probably going to be something resembling the Flood at some point, and I would not be surprised if this war, or whatever the new enemy threat that is going to cause the 2 nations to unite is going to cause everyone to have to band together on some sort of Ark-like spaceship and leave the planet, a la the beginning of Xenoblade Chronicles X. The other thing is, I am almost certain Monolith are going to be unable to resist including the phrase Project Noah somewhere in this game, which leaves me to think of basically the entire situation behind this character. Shulk had been dead for years before Xenoblade 1 started, and Rex dies in the very beginning of Xenoblade 2, and is only alive again under his own power at the very end. So, based on that, there's a good chance that Noah is already dead somehow, just when we see him in this trailer. My guess is that they're going to go for a more existential type thing where, oh, he's not a real human, so he was never alive at all. and make him some sort of prototype artificial lifeform thing like Realians from Xenosaga or J-Bodies from Xenoblade X, and basically have it that he is the prototype, he is the first one of these, and was developed as some sort of secret weapon by a cabal of scientists in the Kavesh military, and the project name that they were operating under was Project Noah, which is where he got his name from. That's my immediate guess, but I could be very wrong here. We can see in this shot that he's wearing a different outfit than the one in the official art, and it turns out that we are going to see 2 different outfits on all 6 main characters at various points throughout this trailer. While this may hint at outfit customization coming back from Xenoblade 1 and X, this might be a more plot-based thing, as I'm pretty sure that one outfit for each character is their military uniform, and then when they go on the actual quest that's the main plot of the game, they're going to change into different adventuring clothes. There's some evidence to back this up in a minute, because Noah gets attacked, and you see actual damage to his outfit, something that they would not be able to do unless you could guarantee he was wearing this specific outfit in that cutscene, so either this is very early on in the game before you even get additional gear that changes your appearance, or the outfits are completely determined by the plot. The one thing that doesn't change between outfits is his weapon. This red replica Monado looking sword with 2 light edges, and really the light blade does resemble a lot of the other Han soldier weapons that we see elsewhere in the trailer. The thing about this is, I don't think Noah's sword is going to be some sort of unique special weapon like the ones wielded by the protagonists of both Xenoblade 1 and 2. It may be a unique weapon in that nothing exactly like it exists, but that's only because it's a customized replica Monado that was made specifically for Noah or for the Chief Offseer or whatever by either some Machina weapons developer or what's left of the Colony 9 weapon development lab. As far as we can tell, this is just another replica Monado, and the actual Xenoblade the title is referring to this time is going to be completely metaphorical and not have any connection to an actual weapon. You can't see it in the official art, but it is pretty clear if you freeze frame the trailer. In the place on the sword where the arts ring would be if it was a regular Monado, you could see this sort of loading symbol-esque design there, made of the same blue light, that covers about half of the circle. We're going to get back to this later, because this symbol shows up on every single character's weapon that we can see clearly across both nations. It also shows up in the mouth of the giant-faced Mechon earlier in the trailer, except while Noah's ring covers about half of the circle, this one is a bit less than a quarter of the circle, so this is extremely significant, and I'm pretty sure we know exactly what it is based on context from later in the trailer. Finally, moving on to the trailer and talking about the stuff in between Noah flipping and him getting his outfit damaged, we see that he's fighting another character, a gray-haired cat girl in white clothes using chakrams that are lined with golden light, suggesting she's from Angus, and we can hear Noah's narration saying, "Tell me, what would possess you to side with them?" I and many other people thought that this was a returning Nia from Xenoblade 2 when we first saw her. However, other sources make it abundantly clear that it isn't. Nia is in this trailer, she's just not this character. This character is a new Gormati-looking flesh-eater blade, but her name is Mio. And yes, she sounds similar to a different onomatopoeia for a cat noise. I'm pretty sure they did that on purpose. Her bio on the Nintendo UK site says that she is the other protagonist of the story, a soldier of Agnes, and an Offseer like Noah. This is very interesting because that shows that there is a shared culture between these two nations. Despite the fact that they're at war, despite the fact that they originate from 2 completely separate universes, they do hold at least some things in common between them, and that is the respect for dead soldiers and the position of Offseer. In fact, we're actually going to see her and Noah participating in an Offseer ceremony together, despite the fact that they're from opposing nations. Now, this might just be because the party is coming together from separate nations and trying to find a way to end the conflict, and they're doing that because they became friends there, but it is also distinctly possible that there is an intentional truce that is held in order to conduct these ceremonies and honor the dead. It's hard to tell in this cutscene and way more obvious later, but I'm going to talk about it here. You can also see that Mio's chakrams have the exact same loading symbol as Noah's weapon and the big Mechon. It's just lit up with the same color as the energy rings on her weapons as opposed to the blue, and it's also roughly half full. As the fight continues and after Noah's line ends, we hear a voice that is presumably Mio saying, "We're fighting because there are enemies to kill," suggesting that They might have known each other beforehand, but they're fighting because they're soldiers from the opposing nations, and they have to fight because that's just what you do in this world. Fighting in order to live, and living to fight. As with most of the Agnes soldiers, her outfit seems to be a combination of Nia's blade outfit, Mithra's outfit, and armor from Adam, the Nation of Torna, and Indal. After Mio cuts Noah's jacket a little bit, another character rushes in to shield him from an attack. He is a guy with gray skin and white hair, and puts up a shield using an energy weapon very similar to the ones the generic Homm soldiers were carrying earlier in the trailer, which he uses to block an attack on him and Noah by another character that seems to be from the opposing side, who hits the shield with a hammer. The voice line that plays is not Noah or an actor I recognize from Xenoblade 1 or 2, so it's presumably this character's voice saying, "I refuse to believe you're him." It's implied that this character is either friends or at least comrades in terms of serving together with Noah, and the two people they're fighting both seem to be female as far as we know. This line doesn't really make a lot of sense and is probably the most confusing single line in the trailer. However, this might be a translation thing. My guess would be the context that makes it necessary to understand this line is present in the same sentence in Japanese, but because of how translating languages work, it isn't all present in the same sentence in English, so the English version of the line just conveys less information than the Japanese one would, and if I was able to understand that language and what he was saying in that trailer, it might make a little bit more sense. His name is Lanz, and he's described as an ally of Noah's who wields a great sword that doubles as a shield. It's Machina Rein. You might think that he's not Machina, and I even thought he was Indaline for a little bit when I first saw him. However, he has white hair. Machina do have hair, the ones we can see all have white. His eyes are red, which is the same color as Egil, Vinea, and Linata off the top of my head, probably more. And he also has two-tone gray skin with gold filigree-looking things in the gaps. So it might be that he is somehow part Homms. I don't know how they would do that. Machina might have engineered themselves to look a little bit more like Homms in the future, or the things that we thought were parts of Machina bodies in Xenoblade 1 turned out to just be their clothes, and because they're a more combined culture with Homms and Hyentia now, they're adopting a different fashion sense, and it's more easy to tell that they look a lot like humans. Also worth noting, there are some baby Machina NPCs. Those look a lot like just mechanical versions of Homms, and Zenza created Homms and Hyentia in his own image. He basically looks human. Mainith basically looks like the same kind of humanoid Machina as Lanz, so it's possible that, yes, she created Machina in her own image, they looked more humanoid than we thought, and were just wearing weird clothes. I don't really have a lot to say about Lanz, and he gets my award for most likely to be the simplest character with not a lot of an arc that a lot of people like, because again, he seems to basically just be Rein, but more metallic. Like Noah, he's wearing a different outfit than in his official art, although this one is a bit more understated. Yes, he does still have a long coat and pants on, however, in his official art, the coat doesn't have sleeves, the pants are camo and have belts on them, and the shirt shows off his muscles a little more. So it seems like this is his military uniform, but his adventuring clothes are much closer to it than Noah's. As for the person he's fighting, it's this young woman with a giant hammer that has a half-full light green loading symbol on it, interestingly colored glowing hair tips, and is saying the line, "I knew it, I saw this coming," in an American accent. Her outfit is very similar to Mio's. Mio just has a different overcoat thing with long tails on it and a bow, while she has a shorter one with detached sleeves, which identifies her as a member of the Agnes military. Her name is Senna, and she's described as a soldier who is an ally of Mio and Taion, a character we've not seen in the trailer yet, and that despite her petite figure, she wields immense physical strength. Now, if the American accent and giant hammer didn't give it away, if you look at her official art, where she's wearing much less clothing than she has on now, you can even more obviously see ether lines, as well as a blue core crystal in her chest. Senna is a blade, and unlike Mio, who is a flesh eater, she is just a regular blade fighting on her own, seemingly without a driver. Disclaimer, Mio does not have an American accent. She has a Welsh accent, I think. It's a lot lighter than Mia's is, but it's still there, suggesting that she might not necessarily be a blade herself. She could technically be a blade eater who had a flesh eater core implanted in her. However, of course, Nia still has the Welsh accent despite being a blade, though she was also raised as Gormati and tried to disguise herself as Gormati for like a decade, which suggests that she did that on purpose to cover things up, so it could still go either way. Mio very obviously looks like she could be a child of Nia, but I didn't think blades could even have kids that way in the first place, and again, we see Nia later in the trailer, she didn't turn into a titan and create more blades, so I don't really know. If Nia had a kid, and that kid was another flesh eater, then yeah, okay, case closed, that makes perfect sense. I just didn't think blades could have kids. If Mio is a different flesh eater who looks almost exactly like a Gormati and has twin rings, which are the weapon type associated with the blade that Nia uses most, that's a weird coincidence. But if she's just another Gormati, either the child, adopted, biological, or whatever of Nia, and just had the core of some random twin ring flesh eater implanted in her, then that's a lot less coincidental and a lot more believable. It is really interesting, though, seeing Senna operating at what seems to be full strength without a driver. Now, is Mio her driver? That's certainly possible. Is Taion her driver? That's also certainly possible. It's also possible that just in an effort to make blades and humans more equal to each other, they found a way to make blades awaken as themselves without a driver, so who really knows? Anyway, as far as her design goes, Senna has dark grayish blackish hair, brown eyes, and the tips seem to be on light blue fire. She really looks like the child of Morag and Brigid, but I don't know how that would happen. Like, if they manage to find a way, great for them, I'm really happy. But again, I didn't think blades were able to reproduce, and yet 2 of the 3 characters from the Xenoblade 2 side very much seem to be the children of blades in some way. Based on her hair and her resemblance to Brigid, I would assume that Senna is a fire blade, however we don't really see her using any elemental attacks, she just kinda swings the hammer. From what we can tell, Noah is the DPS character of the Kavesh trio, and Lanz is obviously the tank there, while Mio seems to be the Agnes healer, and Senna is the Agnes tank, especially because Shield Hammer was a tank weapon class in Xenoblade 2, and if she is actually related to Brigid somehow, Brigid was also a tank blade. Now I know it's kind of early to start talking about boob letters again, but we do sorta have to, because in her adventuring outfit in the official art of her, Senna does have some text on her top. The interesting thing about this is, she is from Agnes. She's from the Xenoblade 2 country. There is a writing system in Xenoblade 2 that is just a alternate version of the Latin alphabet in fictional letters. She has 5 characters on her top. The first one is Alrestian for the number 8, but the other 4 are not Alrestian. So I have no idea what that means. It could literally just be the manufacturer of the top she's wearing, but it could also mean something completely different if we find a way to decipher the other symbols. Moving on to another, oh god, what actually is this moment? We have a character bearing an extremely striking resemblance to Van Damme from Xenoblade 2 take off a mask. We then hear Van Damme's voice actor say, "You're not enemies now," in a very strained, possibly dying voice. Based on what little background we can see, and that really horribly textured whatever it is behind him, this is in the same area as the big Kavesh army and the small skirmish between the main characters. Now, it might be that the army shot and the character fight were in different areas, but if the game opens up with a big battle, setting the stage like Xenoblade 1 did, then it would make sense, and it's probable that the skirmish is just in a slightly different cordoned off area where those different colored flowers are, as opposed to the big open plain that the massive army is charging down. You can even see a couple of the flowers in the background. The first thing I have to say about this character is, he sounds like Van Damme, he looks like Van Damme, but he is distinctly not the same person as Van Damme from Xenoblade 2. If you're worried about resurrecting dead characters for no reason, I don't think they're doing that. First off, this guy is white. Van Damme in 2 is definitely not white. Second off, different hair color. Third off, he is a lot slimmer than Van Damme in 2 was. He looks to be a lot closer to what I would say are normal human proportions. And then lastly, he is also definitely not Orion. So not only is he a different race in terms of skin color, he is also a different race in the fact that he is human and not a different fantasy race. Orions have pointed ears and scales on their faces, he has none, and we can in fact see that he just has regular human-looking ears. However, he does have the exact same hairstyle, the exact same facial scars, and the exact same voice actor as Van Damme from Xenoblade 2. So either this is someone who actively knows who he was and is honoring his memory in various ways, or this is just the Xeno series having its Sid character, because there is a guy with Van in his name associated with military command in every single Xeno game. However, this is the first time since the Xenoblade series has started where they're reusing elements of a design from a previous Van Damme. The Van Men in Xenogears and Xenosaga were basically the exact same character design but with a tattoo rotated 45 degrees. However, Vanguard, who is named Van Damme in Japanese, and the two previous Xenoblade Van Dammes look completely different, and the only element they share is the squarey mustache, and even then, to Van Damme's Blade was the one to have it, not even the guy himself. This guy also does not have a square tash, because he just kinda has a full beard. He also has an eye patch over his left eye. This and the gray hair are making a lot of people think that this is actually an older Zeke from Xenoblade 2. But I think there are a few holes in that. First off, getting this guy's face from Zeke as he ages is not a very easy extrapolation to make. He doesn't look like an older Zeke. Second off, the eye patch. Zeke's eye patch has a little turtle symbol on it because he comes from a titan named after a legendary turtle and has a pet turtle. This guy's eye patch has a symbol that I can't really tell, but it definitely isn't Turtle's. And then thirdly, he has Van Damme's voice actor, not Zeke's. If it was Zeke, he'd probably still have Zeke's voice actor, considering, you know, older Melia shows up and has Melia's voice actor. I've also seen people say that it's Rex taking elements from both Zeke and Van Damme, who are his two biggest mentors, but I'm still putting my money on either a reincarnation of 2 Van Damme or a brand new character who just happens to look like him because that's how the Van Man works. If this is a returning character though, it almost certainly is Zeke, because Rex turned back into a normal human at the end of Xenoblade 2 while Zeke is still a Blade Eater, and while we don't know exactly how Blade Eaters work and Zeke has much less than a full core, if anyone's going to have an artificially extended life, it's going to be him. My guess though is that he is going to be the character to bring the parties from the two nations together. He is wearing what seems to be a military-esque outfit, but it doesn't resemble either of the two nations, because Kavesh dresses mostly in black and has blue lights on them, and Agnes dresses mostly in white, so he could be some sort of neutral third party, and I'm guessing that Nappan are also going to be some sort of neutral third party, just because that's how Nappan usually work. They're going to profit off of the war instead of participating in it. And my guess would be that in some way the battle goes weirdly, and this guy gets wounded, but is able to bring Noah and Mio's groups together and make them realize the war is pointless and that they should go and search for a way to stop it. He actually narrates things later on in the trailer, so I'm guessing that he is going to be the one, possibly in his dying breath, giving basically the outline of the adventure to the party. He could be pulling a Dixon, but I kind of hope not. In the second half of Van Damme's line, we transition into some sort of indoor room with blue lights and a lot of the golden motes floating through the air, as 4 people wearing outfits very, very similar to the one Noah had on earlier in the trailer are all playing the exact same flute, while in the foreground we see a bunch of people wearing basically Shulk's Future Connected hoodie, except for one person in the lower right hand corner who has a mohawk. This seems to be a group of Kavesh Offseers doing their duty and honoring the dead. While 3 of the 4 characters seem to be generic NPC looking models, we then zoom in on the 4th one, and if anyone in the game is a descendant of Shulk and Fiora, it is definitely this person. That or Olivier Lenheim finally found his way into Xeno. But the most interesting thing about this character, because we know absolutely nothing about them other than they're probably related to Shulk and Fiora, and they're likely Noah's boss, since they're probably a descendant of an iconic character, they seem older than him, and they seem to be the head person in this Offseer ceremony. But the other thing is, they have a tattoo with gray and red squares and lines on it on the back of their left hand. Is this a mark indicating that the person is an Offseer when they're out of uniform? Close, but not exactly. If you look at Noah's official art, you can in fact see that he does have the exact same tattoo on his right hand, not his left. Might just be a handedness thing and the other person is a lefty. But if you look at Lan's, you can see he has a very similar tattoo on his chin. So this just seems to be the mark of someone who is part of the Kavesh military. This exact same pattern also shows up in the 3 on the Xenoblade Chronicles 3 logo, and the shade of red in the red part of the tattoos is also the exact same red as the 3. These symbols look like a combination of Zanza symbols and more rigid, machine-like structure because they're more geometrical instead of being curvy and loopy. So it might just be a symbol of the unity of Bionis and Mechonis and not something hinting at anything greater, which was the case for Xenoblade 2, because there was an X-like symbol in the 2 there, and that just referenced something on Pyra and Mithra's outfits, but it could have some sort of significance later on. This does, however, indicate that while promotional material refers to both Noah and Mio as protagonists of this game, Noah is probably going to end up being at least slightly more important, since his country's symbol is the one in the logo of the game. As we transition to the next scene, we get a new voice line, probably from Mio, saying, "Fine for you, isn't it? All the time you've got." And this plays into a really big theory that I've seen a lot of people come up with independently, that I'm not going to talk about until a bit later on, because there's plenty more evidence for it later. The scene it transitions to is one of Noah and Mio playing the flute together, in a location that seems to have more foliage than the rocky area Noah was playing in at the beginning of the trailer. The interesting thing is, we know exactly what Kavesh Offseer flutes look like. We've seen 4 of them together at once. They're the same black flute that Noah was playing at the beginning of the trailer. However, Mio is the one playing that flute here, and Noah is playing a different white flute that is probably an Agnes Offseer flute, because the colors match the colors of the nation's uniforms and stuff, and though you can't see it very well, there does seem to be some Siren/Mithra-esque patterning on the gold filigree of the flute. So it looks like the 2 of them are performing an Offseer ceremony together, possibly an independent one away from everyone, just as a sign of their new unity as a party, or trying to attempt to heal the wounds between the 2 nations, and as a symbolic part of that, they swapped flutes and are mourning for each other's dead countrymen. We then pull back to see them wearing the same outfits but without the jackets at a sunset scene in an area that looks like a lot of ruins throughout the series, but the big tree-like thing on the left side might indicate that it's the ruins of the World Tree from Xenoblade 2, and we can only really see valley-esque stuff in the background, so we can't tell if it's Moratha or a different ruin. This scene looks like it might have taken place before the previous one, and is their first real bonding moment, as you can see that Noah is holding the black flute here, and it looks like they're about to pass it to each other, so this is probably the moment where they swap, possibly before doing the performance the next day. The most mind-blowing scene about this scene is the fact that the voice line playing is very clearly Rex saying, "You can try to move forwards again." I have no idea who this is talking to, or if it's a present day line or a flashback or something like that, but I'm almost certain that even if Rex is alive during this game, that this line specifically was said in the past, because he sounds exactly the same as he did when he was 15, and if Rex was going to be an old man, they'd probably have the VA make a slightly older sounding Rex voice to do the Rex lines when he was in that state. There are plenty of characters this could be referring to, but obviously the short list is Pyra, Mithra, and Nia. Pyra and Mithra because it's Pyra and Mithra, and Rex talks to them a lot, and Nia because she's actually in this trailer. This obviously needs a lot more context before we can remotely tell what this has to do with anything, because really, anyone could be moving forwards, although a theme of this game does seem to be stagnation and being stuck in the same bad situation for a long time, as well as the theme of life that they keep harping on about. But the most important thing about this is, there is going to be some form of new Rex content in the game, probably flashbacks, assuming he's dead, which also heavily indicates that there's going to probably be Shulk flashbacks as well, and we get to see him either older or other flashbacks too, shortly after the time of Xenoblade 1. We then cut back to what seems to be the same battle scene from earlier, as the skirmish continues and we get introduced to the last 2 main characters. The first one rolls up next to a rock, presumably after getting hit or dodging an attack, and says, "How can our lives mean so snuffin' little to ya?" Which is very surprising, largely because she's the first High Entia we've ever seen without a more posh-sounding accent. If you notice though, her hair is either blonde or brown depending on the lighting, and her wings are slightly smaller than even Melia's. This and the accent heavily suggest that she is High Entia, but she is less than half High Entia, or more Hams than even Melia. This is also backed up by her little bio, which says that her name is Uni, a childhood friend of Noah and Lan's who has a sharp tongue and rough personality. She specializes in healing her allies in battle. So, as I indicated earlier, yup, each trio of characters is going to be a tank, a DPS, and healer, but the interesting thing is, Uni is a childhood friend of Noah and Lan's. That's weird because the three races they are normally age at very different rates. Homs age exactly like humans, Hyantia age at roughly a sixth of the speed, Melia is 88 in base Xenoblade 1 and looks like she's in her late teens, and Machina take hundreds of years to become adults and thousands before they finally die. Yet all three of these characters were childhood friends, so they were children at the same time. Uni can easily be waved away by she's more Homs, so she ages faster, closer to them, but the fact that a Machina was childhood friends with a Homs and a Hyantia, and they all look to be roughly the same age maturity-wise, is really interesting. So it's possible that Machina altered their lifespans to mature faster, possibly to better facilitate growth alongside the other races or something like that, or he is just part Homs also somehow, which, I don't know, weirder things have happened. I've already talked about a Blade and a human having kids. Homs and Machina, not impossible if you take that for granted. Uni is also very clearly wearing a Kavesh military uniform, although this one has a boob window for some reason, and she has a future-connected Shulk power disc on her belt. Her weapon, though, is actually a combination of Sharla and Melia's, as it looks like a staff, but it also has a rifle at the other end, so she's probably going to be the primary ranged character of the Kavesh trio, and is obviously the healer, probably combining Sharla's healing ether shells and maybe using more Melia-like stuff as her attacks, which is really funny. She has a gun staff, the gun part is for healing, and the staff part is for attacking, if we go by this theory. We can also see that, yep, she has the same tattoo as Noah and Lan's on her chest, which is even more visible in her official art, which shows her adventuring outfit. The interesting thing about this is not only does it look the most Xenoblade X out of any of the outfits in the game, but she's the only one of the three Kavesh characters to still have the future-connected power disc on her belt, at least visibly so. So my guess would just be that Noah's and Lan's are on their back or underneath the coats that they're wearing, because hers is much shorter and it's open, and she is the Sharla-like, so she's probably going to be the most fanservice-y character out of these. We then flip over to the final character, who launches an attack of origami birds from a gauntlet on his left wrist, saying, "They're not your friends anymore, they're his fuel." This is Taion, a character who's said to be a tactician who fights alongside Mio using his smarts and insight. Out of the three Agnes characters, this is the only one that could potentially not have anything to do with blades. However, though, both of his outfits cover up his chest, so he may have a core crystal there that we just don't see. If you look in the wide shot before he launches the attack, you can see that he's pushing up his glasses, indicating that this is definitely the ACOS or HB of this game, and that the gauntlet on his left hand does in fact have a half-full light green loading symbol. This line, combined with Lan's "I refuse to believe you're him" from earlier, really suggests that at least some of these main characters did know each other as children prior to becoming fighters in the military and going up against each other. "They're not your friends anymore, they're his fuel," though, could mean a very large amount of very different things, and at least from the context of this scene, it seems to indicate that he views people in the Kavesh military as not human anymore and the fuel for some guy that we know nothing about. Possibly a returning Zanza, though I really wouldn't like that if that were to happen, but also possibly something else. Maybe you have to be drafted to join the military of either nation, and outside of some form of required conflict, they're actually relatively at peace and the people don't hate each other. And that there's some other higher power forcing people from the two nations to fight each other eternally for some reason, and that people who join the military are taught to view their opponents as not human, and all they are fuel for whatever this entity is. Very interesting, not necessarily true, but I've been thinking that Alvis might have gotten corrupted when he was out journeying the universe and came back as some sort of all-powerful evil, and this could potentially point to that. What we can say with somewhat reasonable certainty, though, is that at least two people from opposing sides were friends at some point, probably Noah and Mio, just based on them being the protagonists, and that they did end up fighting at some point, but obviously later the two parties do join up, and my guess would be that whatever they're doing is for the benefit of both of their nations. My best early plot guess so far is that you actually spend time throughout the story playing as both parties as two separate trios, then eventually they come together in this big conflict, meet Van Damme, decide to join up and do things together or whatever, and then they go on their bigger, unified adventure. And we're gonna see later on that, like X, there are 4 party members on the field at the same time, and I would guess that you don't get 4 party members controllable at the same time until after they join up, so you're stuck with a maximum of 3 until everyone unifies and decides to be nice to each other, then you get 4. Taiyan's weapons don't only look cool, but they're also unique in that every other Agnes weapon we see has the golden light on it, whereas we only see it just on the loading symbol on his gauntlet, and not even anywhere else on that, and the origami birds themselves are just origami birds that seem to have like ink or something on them, but it doesn't seem like he's using a blade weapon, which again suggests he might just be an Alrestian human and not a blade of any sort. It is possible, though, that the gauntlet is a control device, and the things he's fighting with are actually very small-scale, human-controllable versions of the artifice-derived autonomous battle machines that we see elsewhere in other army shots. At last, though, we move on to the best part of every Xenoblade trailer: ridiculous scenery porn, and this looks better than anything else in any previous game. The voice line set over it is again from Van Damme, probably from the same speech before, where he tells them, "Go to this place, you'll find the real enemy behind our conflict." And while the beginning of what he says is a little bit difficult, I think he's talking about the proper name of a certain area, and I'm parsing it as Sword March, the land pierced by a great sword. It's the only way you're going to defeat the real enemy. I don't think anyone who's seen this trailer thinks that the nations or the leaders of the nations are going to be the big bad or final boss, and that there's something worse either lurking behind the conflict or directly responsible for the conflict. So this is completely unsurprising, and I don't even think it's a spoiler to have in the reveal trailer, since based on the outfits and everything, this whole Van Damme speech where he dies is going to take place really early on in the game, probably only a couple hours in. At last, we have a bunch of uninterrupted landscape shots without, like, any voice lines or fighting to preoccupy me, so I can just talk about these. And because the two worlds of Xenoblade 1 and 2 are combined, it's pretty obvious that a lot of these areas are actually going to be conglomerates of different areas from those games, but obviously with a lot of completely different geometry. The first shot is Noah in his adventuring outfit. Interestingly, though, his sword is not displayed on his character model, so it might be an option to hide that. And it does look like the back of his harness has a future-connected energy disc, so it's possible that that's just where he stores it on his back, and I don't know, maybe the weapon magnetizes to that and that's how he stores it. Anyway, though, this is a Xenoblade early game grassland. There's one in every game, not really much to say. This does look a lot more Bionis leg than it does Gormott, though, and it does sort of look like there's a bit of a floating rock formation, because you can see what seems to be sky or water behind something, but it might just be a thing with a small bottom and a big top. The only thing that could potentially tie this directly to a returning area is the fact that you can see what appear to be Bionis leg-like hills in the background. It's possible that this is what remains of the Bionis leg, or it could just be the Bionis' other leg, since I think based on the greater scope model of the Bionis, it does have those hills on both legs. So this could technically be a new area and not revisiting what happened to a previous one. I'm recording this after the rest of the video because I somehow missed the most interesting shot in this entire landscape montage. Noah is running along metal grating that appears to be identical to that at the distant fingertip secret area from the Fallen Arm of Xenoblade 1. We're going to see other parts of the Fallen Arm later on and other parts of this area, and I'm going to talk as if you hadn't seen them before at all, because I forgot that I'd missed this section, but this is also probably close to the wasteland where the big battle was taking place earlier on, and we can also look back and see that it fades into a field-ish area, and that fades into the snowy mountain with the Orion Titan perched on it, and presumably the Mechonis sword is very close by. This has massive Xenoblade X vibes, and it's possible that we might be bringing together story and gameplay elements from 1 and 2, while bringing together the world design from X. Based on the color of grass and the other foliage around, it looks like that tunnel on the left-hand side might connect to the field area we saw before, but I also don't see water or cliffs. So, it's a Xenoblade game, there's probably going to be multiple fields. I'm still guessing that the first one we saw was very much the first big area of the game, like it always is, and that this is just a smaller field-ish area leading up to the climax area where we get to the set piece thing that's part of the logo of the game, because that happened in 2 with the World Tree and 1 with the Mechonis, and that's always how things work. We can also see a brown lump in the lower left-hand corner on the yellower Tanner grass. That could be a sleeping territorial Rotbart, or it could be a rock. I don't know. Back to past Luxon. The next shot seems to be the exact same area, but from a different angle or different location, because the grass is the exact same color, and this has a couple more interesting things to look at, largely because, well, you can see the Mechonis' sword on the right side, and there's also a rock formation in the middle that looks similar to certain things pointing out on the Titan that Gormott is on. So this is likely where the Gormott Titan fused with the new landmass, and the Mechonis sword, well, we've seen it in the logo and in some other shots. It's in the middle of an area next to where the Orion Titan ended up, so my guess is going to be that the remnants of the sword are going to be this game's version of the World Tree, with it being the big landmark you can see from basically every area in the game, and that it's just so big you can just see it from this plane area, because as far as I can tell, the sword is not located in the plane. Sword March almost certainly is the name of the area where the Mechonis' sword is, and presumably since that is the big first site of conflict between the 2 worlds, that is where the source of the conflict is and the real enemy resides, but I'm not sure what exactly Sword March refers to. It could refer to an entire continent not taken over by either nation that just happens to be where the Xenoblade 2 Titans originally ended up, or it could just be a specific area. So I'm not sure if all of the areas that we've seen so far in the trailer are different areas of a greater scope land called Sword March, or if Sword March is just the specific place they're trying to get to, like the head of the Bionis or the World Tree. The next area is Mio in her adventuring clothes running through a section of the area that's probably where the fight at the beginning of the game took place, based on the general wasteland aesthetic and the orange leaves on the trees, which matched up with the orange flowers and grass elsewhere in the trailer. The interesting thing about this, though, is, well, yeah, it looks sort of like Sword Valley, or Oblivia from X, I guess, but this is actually the remains of the fallen arm of the Mechonis, the one that was cut off prior to Xenoblade 1 and was an area where the cultures of the 2 Titans combined. You can see one of the fingers and even the little metal scaffolding of the distant fingertip secret area, as well as a circle that was in the center of the palm where the hidden Machina village used to be. You can also see something I'm a bit less enthused about in this shot, and that is a purpley-white version of Xenoblade 1's item orbs. I really wish they went with the same kind of collection points that Torna had for this game, but they might be overcorrecting a little bit from Xenoblade 2 criticism, which doesn't give me the best sense of the gameplay being good, because if they regress back to Xenoblade 1, then yeah, it's not going to be better than 2 in a lot of regards. But I'm of course staying extremely optimistic, and this one thing is far from enough to ruin the game for me. The next shot is also clearly from the same area and has Lance in his adventurer garb walking up to what seems to be a Kavesh giant mechon thing that has a small camp under it. It seems like this machine is completely powered off despite still having blue light coursing through it, because it has a completely blank loading symbol in its mouth. To the left we see this green deer-ish thing with feathery tail feather things that is probably just an herbivore enemy grazing on whatever that orange plant is. Next is Senna, probably the single best shot where we can see the little side ponytail thing she's got going, and that's the one part of her hair that's almost completely Bridget-esque, running through a city. This city doesn't look like any settlement we've seen in any Xenoblade game so far, but the architecture looks most like Mechonis stuff with some Colony 9-esque buildings in it, so this is almost certainly a Kavesh settlement. Possibly the new Colony 9, I'm not sure. This is obviously a much bigger town than the small military camp we saw previously, but this is also almost definitely not going to be the capital of the country, because if Meli is the leader, it's going to be ruled out of Alchemoth as long as Alchemoth is still in the sky, and the whole point of Future Connected was reclaiming and restoring it, so that is probably going to be the capital. Next shot is Uni in a more jungly area than the plains we've seen before, running through a shallow pond next to another giant machine with an empty loading symbol, but this seems to be an Agnes Artifice type thing, and again, like the other machine, it does still have light running through it, but it's still not moving, probably because the loading symbol is empty. We can also see Flammy on the right hand side, and another item orb. This area might be part Machna Forest, but it's hard to tell. If there is a jungle area and it's not completely new, then it is going to be largely Machna and either be part of a Titan from Xenoblade 2 we never went to, or just nothing from 2 at all, because 2 didn't really have a jungle area other than part of Gormott, and if I'm right, Gormott's already in the plains. Next up is Taion walking into what seems to be a small settlement in an area that really looks a lot like Satoral Marsh, which is interesting because there's a large machine in the center with a half-full loading symbol suggesting it's operational that is very clearly of Agnes make. Even the lanterns here have the green light, so they're very clearly of Agnes make, and this entire settlement seems to be. So it's really weird seeing the potential that the Xenoblade 2 country has either taken over or colonized a part of Xenoblade 1 territory. Now keep in mind, no one was living in Satoral Marsh permanently to begin with, so it's not like a lot of people would be displaced or whatever by another nation moving in, but this war is really a big deal if this is actually part of Satoral and the other nation was able to successfully take it over. It's also possible that since the loading ring isn't empty, that this thing just landed there and there were people riding in it and they came out and they're just setting up an encampment, so maybe it wasn't a full takeover yet. Next up is a very new looking area, largely because it's a series of floating islands that more resemble Oblivia from Xenoblade X than anything from 1 or 2. And we also have Mio grinding on a rail, so apparently this is also Sonic Adventure 3 as well as Xenoblade 3. In the upper left-hand corner, there's a structure that seems to be very Mechon-like, and it's also black and has blue light, so it's probably Kavesh make. If this is any returning area, this might be what's left of the Bionis shoulder after something big happened. Pretty much everyone that was there moved either to Colony 9 or Alchemoth, so again, not many lives would be lost, but that's also the only place with floating islands made of rock and not titans in the entirety of both games' worlds. Next up, we have a shot that, if I didn't know any better, I would have said was literally just Machna Forest from Definitive Edition with Xenoblade 3 characters in it, because it's a jungle with trees, mushrooms, swampy stuff, and a quad wing, as well as an item orb on the left-hand side, and this is our first indication that there are going to be 4-person parties in this game, because Noah is in front, seemingly being the character being controlled, and we also have Senna, Lance, and Mio all on the field at the same time. I have very little reason to believe that there would be 4 characters, and it's just, oh, everyone who's in the party walks around with you on the overworld and disappears in a fight. If anything, the rumors about this game wanting to include more character models on screen at the same time indicates that not only are there going to be more party members, but you're going to be able to call in reserve party members and have them do some sort of assist attack. This is because Xenoblade 2 and Torna had 6 characters on the field at once, and the one blade we see doesn't seem to have a driver, so even with a 4-person party, which obviously opens up a ton of new gameplay possibilities that only people who played X could even begin to think about, that's still less character models than Torna, so if they want to have more, there's gotta be a way to include more characters. The 4-person party also gives me my very easy first theory, which is that we're going to get at least one more character from both nations, so that if someone really likes a nation's culture or aesthetic or something, they'd be able to make a party just of characters from that nation. Next shot is a sandy desert region that resembles something from Torna, which is weird because Torna doesn't exist anymore. It sank below the Cloud Sea long before Xenoblade 3 happened, so this is again probably a conglomeration of maybe Titans we haven't seen before, parts of the Bionis and Mechonis we haven't seen before, or just a completely new area. We see a small pool on the lower left-hand side, as well as some enemies that look a lot like Taos from Xenoblade 2, and a new, very big lizard-like enemy that doesn't resemble any species we've seen before. There are some spines in the distance, probably suggesting what Xenoblade 2 Titans or Bionis parts this area was made out of, but none of them are distinct enough for me to really tell. There is that one weird star-shaped one in the middle, but that's also not anything I recognize from a previous game. Our party is back to 3 people here, with Mio leading Uni and Taion. This, and obviously the many shots where there's only one character visible, suggests that, like Xenoblade 2, you can change the size of the party as well as the people in it. We then see an area that, like the jungle beforehand, is very clearly just a place from Xenoblade 1 again, as this is pretty much Aerith Sea. On the left side of the background, you can see a rock with very high-end looking architecture attached to it. Not sure what that's about, there's probably a platform on top connected to something. And then on the right side, further away, you can see what very clearly looks like elements of the rock and cliffs in Aerith Sea. And we see a new enemy here. This might be a unique monster because it's a lizard-type thing like an Igna or a Chromar, something like those guys, riding a new sea serpent. This could just be a generic enemy, but if it's an intelligent member of a developing race, I guess is the best way to put people like Ignos and Terrkins, riding something, then this seems a lot like a unique monster type thing. 4-person party again, Mio, Noah, Taion, Uni. Next shot is of the same area, and we can see another new type of sea serpent enemy, but this one shows that it's not just Eretz Sea, as a lot of these small islands in the middle are, in fact, parts of the Leftherian archipelago. We can even see what might be the same rock before in the middle connected to that first island, as there's the High Antia architecture, there's the platform, it looks a lot like one of the teleporter platforms from Eretz Sea, so maybe an island from Leftheria crashed into one of the hovering reefs or something. The most interesting thing, though, is you're on a boat. That looks like Junks. I don't think it's the exact same vehicle, but it's probably an upgraded version. And this is very exciting because it shows that controllable vehicles are in this game, which is a very, very heavy hint that some sort of pilotable mech might be returning. Keep in mind, Mithra could go in her artifice and pilot it on her own, so both nations do have access to technology connected to pilotable mechs, and, you know, Kavesh literally has giant pilotable mech on, so at the very least it's going to be a set piece for a boss fight or something. Next scene, back to the desert area. That mechon we saw before next to the settlement standing up and firing a laser. You can see what might be the peaks of a mountain or city or something at the bottom in the background, but more importantly, there is a Zohar symbol on the chest of that thing. And I do not just mean the outline like the conduit or Pyra and Mithra's core crystal. I mean, that is literally the Xenosaga Zohar there. So, it's probably just another reference, because I doubt they're actually bringing in Saga content into this. But, if there is a Zohar shape on a giant machine that also has the loading rings, and it's very clear that there's a real enemy behind the conflict between these two nations, then, yeah, something Zohar connected supplying power to make this war more violent or go on for longer, that's starting to seem like something that would definitely happen in this game. Next shot is just going back to the early conflict between the two parties, and the voiceover is probably completely disconnected from the scene at this point. First off, we have Mio running alongside and up Taion's birds before doing a flip, and saying, "Whatever life is lost, I won't let you shoulder it all alone." The shouldering it thing presumably just has to do with whatever burden Noah undertakes to do this journey or something. Now the thing she says here is really interesting because she says, whatever life is lost, not whatever lives are lost. So she doesn't seem to be referring to people dying. She might be referring to lifetime, which is going to get really intriguing in a moment. When Mio lands, she touches down in between the 3 Kavesh characters, so this was probably her idea of doing a sneak attack, possibly knocking Uni off guard, which is where we see her dodge rolling to the side earlier in the trailer. We can also see Noah's sword when it's completely fired up, and his loading ring is still just at about half. Although it's interesting because most of the other loading rings are black on the inside, while his is glowing blue like the rest of his blade. Next scene is Taion and Uni side by side. They're wearing their adventurer clothes, they're probably on the same side here, and it looks like Uni is trying to do something ether-ish, while Taion is creating a field around the two of them, maybe even the Hilbert effect, I don't know, but it's also hard to tell if he's defending her or if they're working together on something. The interesting thing, though, is that their loading rings are completely full, and they're purple instead of the normal color of their weapons. You can actually see on the official art of all of these characters that Senna, Mio, and Uni, all 3 of them, have those full loading rings with the purple light on their weapons. However, it's not just purple light. It's a snake eating its own tail. That's an Ouroboros symbol. That is not only a reference to something that shows up later in the trailer, but also a very significant term for Xenogears. The Ouroboros is also a symbol of eternity, and with all this talk about lifetime and clocks that we're going to get into later on, there might be some sort of time loop going on, or something to that effect. But, at any rate, the Ouroboros symbol ties back to the name of the world being Ionios. The next shot shows what seems to be the same area from a different angle, and very clearly confirms that this is not somewhere we've been before. It's a much more rocky area, and there's no sign of the fallen arm anywhere, though there are some snow-capped peaks in the background, so it's possible that this is getting very close to the Araya Titan Meccana sword thing. More importantly, Napon are back, because obviously Napon are back, it's a Xenoblade game, they weren't not going to do that, and these two are completely new characters. They're also wearing outfits somewhat resembling the military guard for the two nations. the male-looking one on the left, Kavesh, and the female-looking one on the right, Agnes. Weird thing about that, though, is the Agnes-dressed Napon has very Ricky-esque hair, suggesting that she might be a descendant of him, despite dressing like she's from the Xenoblade 2 nation, and carrying a weapon that very much seems to be a lot like Tora's shield when he's using Poppy Alpha, so I don't know what's happening with that. This could be a brand new character not connected to any previous Napon that just happens to look like that. Although, she looks like Ricky, and the guy on the left is wearing a really badly fitting Rex wig, so it is very, very possible that Napon, out of all races, were the only ones to come together and, like, actually work together and do things in harmony and stuff, as opposed to just fighting all the time, and that resulted in a blending of culture and stuff. Guy on the left has what seems to be a gun handle on his back, so these two are definitely combatants of some sort, which makes me really think that they could be potential party members. We then cut to Uni making an impassioned-looking speech. She's in her adventurer clothes. Mio is also in the shot. This is clearly after the parties come together, and they're standing in what seems to be a very Kavesh-looking designed area. This is probably the cutscene where the voice line she's been saying the whole time plays, and it is a very interesting line. Her accent is thick, and there's a lot of sound effects going on, but the best thing I hear is, "What good's filling up these flickering clocks in our eyes? It'll never replace the friends we've lost." And therein lies the potential entire plot of the game. I'm pretty sure that the loading rings that turn into Ouroboroses when they're full, but have been shown to be in various states of being full or empty at various times, are in fact some sort of clock detailing the lifetime of the being that holds the weapon or pilots the machine. Uni's speech then cuts into Noah and Mio standing together fighting back to back against what appears to be a big Agnes mechanical device. And you can see its clock very, very clearly. It's got a little thing in the center, like the hub that the hands rotate on. It's got a line in the top, which is probably just where the start and the end is. And it's even got a half-full streak that gets thicker the closer you get to the hand, or whatever the thing is pointing up vertically, suggesting that that's probably the head of the snake, and that the clock fills up and it forms the tail. If the big theme of this game is going to be life, and all that entails, then the main characters being soldiers who are literally living on ticking clocks that are built into the weapons they need to fight, and are participating in a pointless war, putting friends against each other for literally no good reason, then yeah, that could be a real interesting thematic philosophical thing. And Uni's idea of it being pointless to fill up the clock? Do you have to fill it up by defeating someone and stealing their lifetime, maybe? Because she's known so many people who have died, so living further is pointless to her because of how much loss she's experienced. And the leaders of these two nations being Melia and Nia, people who have experienced loss so much, like, did something happen to change them to that? But again, there's the fact that everyone has clocks. Everyone has clocks in their weapons. The clocks are replacing the fundamental aspect of a Monado replica and the core crystals on blade weapons. So clearly this is some outside force that's affecting both nations. It's really, really interesting, and again, further emphasizes the fact that the nations and the nation's leaders are clearly not the bad guys here. They might be doing bad things because they're being forced to for some reason, or misled, or everything's a sham, and they just needed to realize that they're all in it together and there's a real foe. But whatever it is, Melia and Nia are not going to be bad guys by the end of the game. The fight scene continues as Mio says, "The flame clock, it has to go." Now, she's obviously fighting this giant machine as she says it, and it's a machine from her own country, so if this thing's called the flame clock, she would know that, obviously. But is she referring to the concept of the flame clock? Are the clocks in everyone's weapons called flame clocks? Or is the flame clock just the machine, or the clock in that machine? Is it just, okay, if we hit the clock, it runs out of time faster and stops attacking us? Or are flame clocks just the name of all the clocks? Not entirely sure here. We then see Goth Melia, the leader of Kavesh, as someone who's presumably her attendant or whatever. They're wearing like full body armor and might be a machina just because they're so tall, walks out of the way, and she's got a new mask on. Melia wearing a mask isn't necessarily a weird thing because she had her own mask in the past. I know it was just to hide her Ham's heritage, but it's also possible that it's just a thing that High Antia rulers wear. Either way, though, she's wearing a very ornate dress that's heavily based on her Future Connected outfit, and she says, "Ouroboros abhor this world." Which, ooh, does that mean that people with full clocks hate the world for some reason? Is Ouroboros the name of the organization the parties form? Is Ouroboros the name of Van Damme's organization, and he just basically recruits them to, like, help further his cause of stopping the war? I really don't know, but I'm thinking of a very large amount of things. The most important part of this shot, though, is Melia's age. We knew Melia was going to be in this game for a long time. However, what was rumored was that the time skip was going to be really big. The words far future were used in multiple different rumors from independent sources. However, while Melia clearly looks older than she did, she doesn't look that much older. She looks to be roughly the same age as Callian was, like early to mid-20s, as opposed to, I mean, I was thinking like 40s, or really old. Like, she's wearing a mask so you can't see her face, but the rest of her body does not seem that much older looking than she was in the past, which is interesting. It is possible that maybe the mask is hiding a really old face, and for some reason she was able to make her body look young, but not her face. But from what I can tell, Melia is not as older as I thought she would be, which suggests that the time skip between the end of the previous game and this one isn't actually as big as I thought. Either that or time loop things have made her young, because there is a very distinct possibility of a time loop with the Ouroboros, the world being named after eternity, and the whole clock thematic. Callian was 63 years older than Melia was when he died. So this suggests that only a generation to a century has actually passed since the end of Xenoblade 1 and 2, as opposed to hundreds of years as we'd initially thought. It was going to be hundreds and not thousands because Melia would still be alive, but it's really interesting to see just how much things have changed in such a relatively small period of time, especially when you have so many long-lived races for whom 100 years would be nothing, like Hyantia, Machina, Indoline, and certain people with core crystals. We then see Nia wearing a mask for some reason, in a modified version of her blade outfit that's a lot more ornate. She's also got this red rope tied around her chest, and that has the exact same tie pattern on it as Mio has on her outfit, so they're very clearly connected, if not actually related. And she is raising her hand, seemingly giving an order or proclamation saying they must be erased without a trace. She also seems to be standing up from a throne that looks sort of similar to Amalthus's chair, so Nia becoming the new Praetor is a great power move because she was hunted as a flesh eater by Indal for ages, but it's also kind of scary because I didn't think anyone would want a Praetor after everything Amalthus did. And her having a mask is just kind of weird because she's never been associated with them before. It might just be a sign of power to match her up with Melia or something like that. I genuinely don't know. It is very possible that she's referring to the party at this point in time, and it cutting from Melia talking about Ouroboros to that could potentially indicate that that's the name of the party, but it's also distinctly possible that she's either just referring to the enemy army in general, or just like some other bad guy, like Fog Beast or something. It is very possible that Melia and Nia are working together to preserve this endless war and the people with the clock weapons or something like that, because that is able to stave off an incursion from Fog Beast or something like that. And she really just wants Fog Beast gone because she doesn't want people finding out that there's a threat other than the enemy military, which would potentially cause them to team up and destroy this delicate world order she's made, even though whatever the party's going to do, it's obviously going to stop this conflict. It's also possible that, connected to Melia saying that Ouroboros abhor the world, that perhaps they don't want people's clocks to get completely full, because when they do, it becomes an Ouroboros, and they find out some truth that would make them hate the world in the way it is, possibly something that has to do with, okay, this is what happened to the people that really die. This is why the war is going on. Everyone actually should be teaming up because there's a bigger threat. I'm not sure, but all of this clock stuff and Ouroboros stuff really suggests either time loop or some sort of playing with lifetimes. If a theme of the game is going to be life, they're going to have to do more with it than just sometimes people are alive and then they die. Even though what they're saying is muffled through the masks, you can easily tell that both Melia and Nia retain the same VA that played them previously. Finally, we just cut to Mio and Noah playing their flutes, their own colored ones this time, and then looking up towards the Orion Titan and Mechonis sword as the title fades in. Xenoblade 1's title looked like it was written with a calligraphy brush to match the style of the Monado art icons, 2's was on fire because of Pyra, and 3's looks to be dissolving into the same particles of light that have shown up at other times the Offseers have played, very heavily tying into the theme of death, seeing off the dead, life in general, and possibly, since the letters themselves are technically losing parts, which wasn't the case previously, this could have something to do with the world itself fading away, And that's what the Offseers are really to do. They're preserving the world by destroying it slowly, or keeping it in stasis or something like that, and the purpose of the party is to try and find a way to stop this conflict and bring everyone together. That's all the material that we've got so far about Xenoblade 3, but I'm going to make some quick other pieces of speculation. First off, other returning characters we haven't seen. From the Xenoblade 1 side, Linata and Vinea, as well as I guess Radzim, but who cares about Radzim? As well as Melia's family members, Tyrea and Teelin. Teelin will probably be an adult, possibly working to fix Telethia. We didn't see a single Telethia in any of the shots in this trailer, so if Agnes killed Telethia before they found out that they were actually Hyentia and people were working to revert them back into their original form, oh, that could easily spark a massive war that's still going on decades later. But it could also just be that they were already cured, and some form of pure-blooded Hyentia does exist again. They're just probably staying away from the front lines because high amounts of ether in battle could very easily turn them back into Telethia. I'm not really sure what Tyrea could do. If Melia really did go full villain, then Tyrea would probably be working against her and could possibly assist and even join the party at a time. I don't think the person walking away from Melia in her little scene was Tyrea. They seem too tall, and while their red is similar to the Bionite Order red, Tyrea also wears black primarily, so I doubt that's her. But as long as Melia's around, Tyrea will probably still be there. From the Xenoblade 2 side, there's obviously Pyra and Mithra. Assuming that they still work vaguely like the Aegis is used to, Rex dying will not return them to their core crystal. We clearly saw that happen with Pyra, and Amalthus died and Malos stayed outside of his core, so that's clearly a thing that Aegises are just immune to. And if Neo went full villain, they're probably going to try to stop their old friend or something. If the Rex line that we heard in the trailer was being said to them, then they're very, very clearly going to be trying to fulfill Rex's last wish and stop the fighting and help people move forward again, which is exactly what Rex said. And even if they don't have another driver, which they probably would swear off of after Rex anyway, I would be very, very surprised if at least one of Pyra and Mithra is not playable, at least temporarily at some point in this game. I already talked about how Zeke might still be alive, even though he definitely isn't the new Van Damme. Obviously, Pandoria would still be there too. They might be one of the last remaining traditional driver-blade pairings, if that's how things like that go. So that could be potentially interesting. I don't know. Zeke might be working with Van Damme just because of his eye patch, but he'd probably still be an old man and barely able to fight or something. Zeke is the new Mabon. That's where this is going. We're totally going to get Pandoria's core crystal, Noah's going to awaken it, and become the first Homs driver. That is not an actual plot prediction, don't worry. If they really want to make 2 New Game Plus canon, then Mikhail could still be alive for some reason, but that would, I think, be really, really stupid. And it seems, based on both Mio and Senna, that blades are somehow able to reproduce and live independently of drivers now, so we might not see a lot of cameos of other rare or important blades from Xenoblade 2 just with new drivers or anything like that. They might really not want to undermine the happy ending different characters had in 2, and a lot of blades might just choose to have their final driver and just stay in their cores. Like, I'm getting buried with my driver, I don't want a new one ever. So I don't know if we're going to see a lot of returning blades, and Senna being a shield hammer basically rules out a Finch cameo whatsoever, so I'm a little sad about that. But as for Titans, Gramps got booted back to old man form, even though he could fly better, so he might be in his prime and as such would still be around and be able to assist characters here, maybe be the airship while Junks is the water ship or whatever. And we could also potentially see a grown-up Turters, because it's slightly implied that Turters might be a baby Titan and not just a turtle, so I would love that you got Junks for sea, Gramps for air, but your land vehicle, because they're obviously at odds with both nations, so you just get Turters as your land mount. I would love that. Oh, also, Dromark is probably still around as long as Nia is still around, so she wouldn't necessarily fight with his weapons, and it would be, like, actually really, really weird if Dromark was somehow turned into a Flesh Eater, returned to his core, and Mio is literally using Dromark's weapons. I don't think they do that. I think it's just a different Twin Wings blade, and that's all where that came from. If we have to fight playing as Nia or against Nia, it's kind of a 50-50 on whether or not she'll use Dromark or use her actual scimitar, because Dromark is a lot less broken than Nia's actual power to control cells, so I don't think Dromark would be particularly useful, especially for fighting bigger threats than we've ever fought before. The other thing is my idea for why the 2 nations are at war. And it's actually really genius because this was totally set up in both previous games. And that is a sort of allegory for the pointlessness of most real-world religious conflicts, because they could be at odds because the different worlds have different views on Klaus. Kavesh, the Xenoblade 1 country, would view him as a tyrant, a basically completely awful person, and that this world was created by Shulk, by humanity, explicitly to create one with no gods. While people from Agnes, the Xenoblade 2 nation, would view him as a flawed but benevolent individual who not only created them, but also gave this new world to them as a final gift before he died and faded away. They would totally argue about this. It would totally come to blows. This is a very, very possible route for the conflict. And it could be like, oh, the people who remember the old world would be like, I don't like this Klaus stuff, blah, 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 blah. But then the kids, the younger people who are the party members would be like, wow, this conflict is stupid, let's stop it. And then join up together and fight the real foe, who is probably connected to the Fog Beasts somehow. The other possibility is that in Future Connected, the worlds had yet to merge, and the whole idea of rifts and things coming through were actually just a prelude to the two worlds colliding. And, like, there are no living big titans in Xenoblade 1 anymore, so there wasn't anything big enough to actually pick up the Makana sword and cut Araya in half. But if the worlds combined in a weird way, it could literally just be that when they fused together, the Makana sword just fell on top of Araya and sliced it in half before getting embedded in the ground. So it is very possible that Future Connected was actually pre-universes merging, and that it happened right after. Either way, Melia's premonition about future evils and the Fog Kings just being a prelude obviously hints that Fog Beasts of some sort are coming back, and I, again, wouldn't be surprised that if we've got more Zohar symbolism, the Conduit is going to return in some way, possibly with Alvis. I always love to say that one out of Pyra and Mithra has become the new Numa, and the other one has become the new Logos, so they just need Ontos to remake the Trinity, and that's probably going to become very important to stop this new threat. But yeah, I'm really guessing Evil Alvis is going to happen at some point as well. I'm completely running out of things to say, so yeah, thank you for watching this massive analysis. I hope I got a lot of things right. I hope I was able to open your eyes on a lot of things. Until next time, which is gonna be in a bit because my voice is destroyed, this is Luxon, signing off.